Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Molina, CEO of Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. Today, we are going to begin a short series of instruction with Marieke Schuurs. She's the owner of Cantare Studios here in Eugene, Oregon. But before I read her bio, the reason why I've asked Marieke to come on this show and help us is because we're learning to adapt in new ways to new methodologies of communications and new forms of communications. And there's different stresses to our bodies and different demands on how we effectively communicate via so much media. And so I've asked her to bring her to come on the show and bring her expertise and help us to improve and to become aware of things that we can improve on to make sure our message is clear and that we're communicating in such a way that it's effective for the hearers on the other side. So I'm going to begin with reading her bio. Marieke Schuurs has been coaching students in voice production and performance from an Alexander Technique perspective for the past 25 years. She has a Master of Fine Arts in Vocal Performance, is a licensed body mapping specialist, and a certified Alexander Technique teacher. She is a board member of the National Association of Teachers of Singing and a teaching member with Andover Educators and Alexander Technique International. She offers individual sessions and group workshops through her studio, Cantare Studio, Voice, and the Alexander Technique. Marieke, good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here, Mark.
Thank you for your time. I realize as we began this new modem of communication via media outlet Zoom and other arenas,
hmm
we are experiencing new kinds of stresses.
What kinds of stresses?
Well, there's frustration levels for one, and when
Okay.
people are in Zoom, if you're communicating and someone wants to add, the signal cuts off and only one is heard and the other one's cut out.
hmm
And so when you're trying to engage in conversation, that can be a frustration point.
Right. Right. I've run across that in some of my board meetings. And of course, all those voice teachers board meeting together have all these ideas of how to handle such things. So it gets pretty funny. But we've discovered that if everyone in a group Zoom keeps their microphone muted, and raises a hand to indicate that they want to speak, and then one person is acting as the kind of the coordinator and points to a hand and says, okay, so and so wants to speak and so wants to speak. That's one way of handling it. That's a way that NATS has decided to handle it in terms of not overlapping, because you can't. That is, you are totally correct. That is a thing that doesn't work on Zoom.
Mhm.
So it
So
requires a little more organization. Yeah.
no, that's really good advice. I know that Zoom has different applications. You can have one that's webinar based and it
hmm
allows only the main presenters to speak and everyone else can participate, but they can't be heard and they can't be seen. But
hmm
you can access via the Q&A module
hmm
or the chat module. But not everyone can has the ability to do that.
Well, sure, but I have just a basic Zoom, so I'm just talking about the individuals muting themselves on
Mhm.
their own side until they're given permission to speak. Yeah, rather than somebody coordinating all that.
hmm So
Yeah.
yes, thank you for saying that because I was going to try to make that distinction that there are options, but not everyone can afford those options. So how
hmm
can we be successful with what is available to us? And I have the basic Zoom as well, that I'm allowed 100 up to 100 people.
hmm
But I did some candidate forums for our local elections, and there was some difficulties with that. People would unmute themselves, and the background noise when candidates were speaking, and trying to manage that. And it was probably more frustrating for me and the candidates than it was the people watching who might not even been aware that they had unmuted themselves.
That would be a tricky situation.
Hmm.
Yeah, almost like for people coming in, you want to send them a protocol list that says this is what's expected in this meeting when you come in. And then if they don't follow it, as you as the coordinator need to be able to drop them off, because otherwise they're just being destructive.
Yeah, I would send out that protocol as you mentioned, and then I would make mention as the forums began to keep maintaining the mute on your side because we only want to hear the candidates. Because number one, this is a new technology for me.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I wasn't quite sure how to manage the upgraded version of Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, if you're not competent with it, technically competent with it, it affects your confidence on how you manage it.
Right, I would agree.
Right.
It takes a little snooping around in all the different tutorials and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, so we're sitting a lot more in our meetings in regards to not that we're not sitting at meetings, but it's different when you're in a room and you have the energy of the room and you're interacting with people.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're all looking at screens. Now we are sitting, some are sitting upright, some maybe be sitting back in their sofa, whatever that might look like. But it's a different kind of stress on the body. It's a different kind of physical stress, emotional requirement, physiological requirement. Can we talk a little bit? Can you talk a little bit with your expertise and your background in the body mechanics, the body mapping of some of the best postures we can assume, some of the best breathing practices, and how we can be most effective in communicating effectively on media?
Sure. So I think the media change simply outlined or brought into prominence issues that were there already, actually. So when somebody is not breathing enough for their speech, in the general excitement of the group, they may not notice, but when they're sitting by themselves at their desk on the computer, they may notice. So, in an ergonomic way, it's actually easier to breathe deeper into your system when you're sitting than when you're standing, because the balance of the torso, top of you through your pelvis, which is where all your breathing patterns occur, right? And doesn't you don't have to worry about the added piece of then balancing through your legs if you were standing or walking around, let's say, at a networking function. So if you think of breathing, and I think personally you can breathe in any kind of position, but the more relaxed you are, the better, right? So I can sit up and I can think of breathing, let's say, all the way down to my chair to get a nice deep breath. And I can do that. That's fine. I can also lean back and do the same thing, right? I
Mhm.
can even lean forward and do the same thing. I can still breathe down to the bottom of my torso, which allows the diaphragm muscle to go all the way down and the ribs to open and for you to get a complete breath of air. Now, if I get tense or uptight and I become rigid, then I can no longer breathe easily. It's a little bit like the analogy of a glass ketchup bottle and a plastic ketchup bottle, if you think about it. It's way easier to get the ketchup out of the plastic ketchup bottle, and that's because the plastic ketchup bottle is flexible.
Mhm.
Okay? And if you become rigid or tight because you think you need to sit up, then that's actually going to inhibit your ability to get a good breath. Now, the other aspect of that is that this is your vocal tract, sort of from here to here. And this is probably very specific to our new medium on computer, this is our vocal tract and it's also our airway. So if it's kinked, right? If somebody's like this, let's say, because they're looking at the computer, right? Or let's say they think they need to be overly upright, so they're back here, right? If this has got a kink in it, then it limits the breathing, but it also limits the resonance of the voice. Okay, so where is that good head balance? It's the place where you have three movements that your head can do, right? Your head can nod yes, it can shake no, and it can tip maybe. Okay, those are the three movements: yes, no, and maybe. I know, it's so simple, right? But if you're here, that's suddenly very difficult to do. And if you're back here and you're rigid, that's also difficult to do. So the place where you can do those three movements the most easily is going to be the most easy balance for your head on top of your spine, which then gives you the most ease through your throat.
Okay.
So now
And
here you are nodding yes to me while you're listening, and you could be self-checking at the same time, going, okay, is my head being nice and easy on the top of my spine? Good. And if you listen to my voice, if I change position, let's say, and I'm using this one because it's the easiest one in front of a computer. We do it when we look at our phones. We do it when we peer forward to try and see something on the computer. So listen what happens if I go la 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 and then la 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 la. Can you hear a difference in the sound? Yeah, and so it's a little bit like bending a straw, right? And the resonance is happening through here, and some of it's happening up here, and some of it's happening down in your chest. But as soon as you get a kink in the line, so to speak, because of something you're doing with your head on top of your spine, then you lose the resonance, and the sound gets narrowed and kind of pinched. And then if you try and force more volume through to compensate for the fact that the resonance is not there, then you end up with a tone that's fairly strident or fairly breathy, right? Some people overblow their air, and some people kind of do the opposite. They try and muscle their chords together. So,
so if we're in a conversation with someone on Zoom and it starts to get a little animated for whatever reason,
mm-hmm,
what are some of the best things we begin to feel a tension arising for not judging that tension, if it's for whatever reason there's tension arising,
mm-hmm.
excitability for some reason, or a stressor for some reason, and we're becoming aware of that. What are some of the things that we can do to kind of slow ourselves down to make sure that I think the resonance is important, tone of voice is important when we communicate.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those self checks that we can do, or self corrections that we can do to get ourselves back in a better position of relaxation?
So I'm hearing that you're talking about experiencing sort of an adrenaline rise in a confrontational situation while you're in a group meeting on Zoom or some other platform. Um, so it, I think I'm hearing that you're asking for both someone who's the arbitrator of the situation, i.e., the person in control or charge, and maybe even just one of the other listeners because the topic is becoming heated, right? Or emotional. So, what you're talking about is sort of a shifting of people's energy into their flight or fight mode. Okay, and that means that your pituitary gland is perceiving a threat, sends a message to your adrenal gland, says, give me some adrenaline. I need to be able to go into battle or run away, one or the other, or freeze, right? And all those things create tension. And in that tension, there's a very defined pattern that happens in our system. Okay. So, and I call it turtling because what we do, just like a turtle when it gets frightened, it pulls its head in and it pulls its legs, arms and legs into its shell. So too do humans under adrenaline. They tighten at the neck, they pull in their arms at the shoulders and their legs at their hips.
Mhm.
Okay. And they hold their breath. Okay, so think about the rabbit in the bush, and the dog comes sniffing around, and the rabbit becomes frightened. And first he freezes, right? So he doesn't want the dog to hear his breath, so he becomes very small and he holds his breath, hoping the dog doesn't notice him in the bush. And then, as the dog comes closer, all that stored kinetic energy has to go in one of two directions. He can either run away, or he can leap out and be the killer bunny and attack the attack the dog, right? So, because the breath gets locked up and the body gets locked up, it tends to self-perpetuate the adrenaline. In other words, if you start going there, you tend to go farther and farther and farther in that direction. Okay, and then it makes speaking hard because your breathing is locked up. Does that make sense so far?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the first thing you can do is consciously breathe, right? You
Right.
can breathe out for 5, breathe in for 6 through your nose. Nobody needs to know you're doing it, right? Um, you can, and then just do that for even just 3 or 4 breaths to restore a longer, slower breathing pattern rather than the high, fluttery breath that happens when you're under adrenaline. And the other thing you can do is consciously relax your arms and legs away from your torso. So this is a very Alexander technique because in Alexander technique there's a mind body concept that says what you think influences your body, but what your body does influences your mind. So if you perceive a threat, which is a mental thing, and then you get this whole chemical reaction in your system, and your physiology reacts, your body reacts to that, you can start to undo that process from the body level. If you start to restore your breathing, relax your limbs, then the adrenaline will start to dissipate out of your system. And when that happens, you can start to think more clearly again. And you're not buzzing with all this whatever anxiety or anger or frustration or whatever it is. That's a personal thing you can do, and I think you could do it in a Zoom meeting pretty well while you're listening to someone else and they're saying something inflammatory and you're just trying to stay calm, right? Then these are that you could certainly take those 3 long breaths. There's a technique which I don't think you can do on Zoom unless you mute your video. But there's a technique that we used to use backstage, and that is to breathe in through one nostril, which slows your inhalation down. But if suddenly half the group started doing this, it would look rather funny. So
Yeah.
like, right.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have the option to mute your picture and still be listening, in which case you could do something like that. And you alternate nostrils. So you might take a breath in through this one and then release through the other one. And 3 of those will calm you down pretty quickly. It's a technique used for when people have performance anxiety backstage right
Right.
before they go on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to remember because even though I've done several of these interviews now on Zoom and I have a lot of public exposure, I'm used to being in public and public speaking and coaching and a soldier and all of those things. Before every video, I still have this sense of anxiety that I have to deal with, this measure of we're about to go live and be mindful of, you know, that those aspects of being live because things can happen when you're live. You can struggle
Of
with a
course.
speech. You can, you can say something that someone misinterprets and they get angry and they, lash out at you. That's happened to me already before, and I was a little caught off guard by that because the person that I was interviewing had no issues with it. I had no issues with it, but someone who viewed the video later had an issue with it and commented about that. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we can't be perfect, that we'll say some things sometimes that, for whatever reasons, an offense to someone else. But,
Well, because otherwise you're being too safe, Mark. If you're
right.
going to put your thoughts and ideas into the big pool of humanity because you think they're valuable, if you play it too safe, then they have no impact.
Mhm.
So if you're going to say something that you think is really important, you're going to have some people that are going to disagree because your comment maybe demands that they think about something that they don't want to think about
Mhm.
or they feel very strongly in a different direction. But it's not about you. It's
Right,
just about the idea that you're presenting.
right. So I want to
Yeah.
ask a personal question using myself as an example.
Okay.
Someone like me who speaks loudly, who asks questions when we're in board meetings, I'm very direct. I ask a lot of questions. A lot of that, Marika, you haven't seen that side of me because we haven't been in a boardroom together. But a lot of that
Correct.
is from the years of military training where we were expected to ask questions. We were expected to be very well informed. Before every training engagement, you received your operations order. You had a big sand table that you built in tactical training event, training scenarios. You went over all the scopes of the plan of action and then post training moment, you had what's called an AAR, which stands for After Actions Review. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody, regardless of their rank, had the chance to express in the AAR what we did well, what we didn't do well, what was the plan, what was the mission, where did we fail, what are your observations on what we can do to improve. And everybody was expected to input. And they
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those exchanges were, you know, invigorating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not necessarily aware sometimes that someone can be offended or intimidated because I'm just simply asking questions. What are some of the things someone like me can do to consider that um, and consider it? How can I improve?
Yeah, yeah. So I think you might be brushing up against a cultural difference, Mark. The culture of being in the military with a very direct communication style, right? Those ground rules were set out for those meetings and in that culture. And you probably don't talk to your 7-year-old daughter like that, right? Or your wife, right? So you're talking about adjusting to a different culture, and finding the rules, the ground rules of that culture for communication, for group communication. Now, what the group that the board meeting? Are you in a board right now? Are you on a board right now?
Springfield Chamber of Commerce, HIV Alliance, Springfield City Club, Willamette Lane Budget Committee.
Okay. So let's pick one. So let's pick Springfield Chamber of Commerce for a second. What do you think are the ground rules of communication for that organization?
Well, currently under the current leadership, I believe that they want not just our civic engagement and ideas, but they want a vibrant engagement on the ideas that are being presented with regards to government affairs, the finance committee, the membership committee, many different areas that they have impact and influence on in our local community. And everyone that's on the board is there because they want to participate. And
Excellent. But so here's my question. You're talking about content.
yes,
I'm talking about style and culture. Are they indirect communicators? Are they direct communicators? Are they super careful about each other's feelings? Are they not so careful? Are and you've been with that chamber group for a while, so I bet you could if you thought about it, you could come up with those.
yes, ma'am. So some are very direct, and some are very participative, and some are very honest with their input, and honestly, and some aren't. Some will, and this is not an indictment against everyone. I'm trying to understand this because I know that sometimes I can put people off just by asking questions or asking in a way that's very direct and some people have mentioned to me, well, you kind of intimidate me when you ask questions. So like, they'll go back to their office and send an email about their opinion or point of view rather than bring it up in the group. And that's fine. Stylistically, that's maybe a better way for them to communicate. But sometimes I get concerned that the manner in which I press in on issues is, should I change?
Well, I don't know that I can answer that directly for you, of course. I found in teaching one-on-one students, let's take that analogy for a second. Um, Students come in and I'm gonna pull another piece out of the air and bring it in, and that is the time that I've spent with my husband Michael Clement's disc personality profile stuff, which I use in my studio. So some people ask how is this going to work? How are we going to manage this? Some people ask why. Why is this important? Some people ask who. Well, who's going to be involved? And some people ask what. What are we doing here? Okay. And some people do a combination, what and why, right? What are we doing and why are we doing it? And they're more direct. And some people ask, well, who's going to be involved and how are we going to do this? And they're more indirect. Okay. Everybody is pretty consistent about those. I've not met somebody who isn't. So if you listen to somebody, you can probably guess what their primary word use is. And if you match it in your questioning, you're less likely to intimidate them.
Mhm.
So if you're gonna ask a question of somebody on the chamber and they tend to use how statements, right? Then use a how statement to ask your question. And it's a little bit like instead of walking, two people walking this way to each other, right? That you turn and you match and you walk parallel with them because just for a moment you adopt their style of communicating and it just puts people at ease. So, like I said, I have a lot of students over the years. I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of all ages of people in my studio. And I always match with them for the hour because it gains their trust. It doesn't make any difference in what I'm saying. I can say the same thing 4 or 5 different ways. I just adjust it to what I perceive their communication style is.
Well,
Yeah.
that's really important, and that's really useful because, we live in a society where we have to be effective communicators. We should desire to be, and I'm asking this as a genuine question and a sincere question, because I want to be a genuine communicator and a sincere communicator with those that I participate in serving my community with. And I never considered the cultural aspect of that consideration until you mentioned it.
Oh, good. I hope that's helpful. Play around with it, and then you can come back and ask, tell me.
That's really good. I'll be sure to do that. So, all right, we talked about some of the simple movements today of the mechanics of the up and down, the yes or no, the tail,
Maybe, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe, and then the airway and the vocal cords here in the neck. It's the distance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the breathing techniques we can do to maintain our composure when things get a little bit more excitable or animated for some reason. And then also trying to stay relaxed so that you're thinking clear.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm. And so the response of the pituitary gland and the adrenal gland and how they message one another when things are getting more tense, which symbolizes fight or flight. And we can easily become a turtle and shut in and do it that way or respond that way.
Yeah. Good. Good summing. That's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then for if we're too rigid and we're too uptight, that hinders our ability to breathe. It
Mm-hmm.
affects the sound. It has negative effects on the resonance. We begin to try to overcompensate, which creates more stress on the resonance and the vocal cords. Then it causes different kinds of strains, not only vocally, but the full physiological aspect of our bodies.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, any final comments you'd like to encourage listeners to remember moving forward after today in preparation for our next meeting?
Uh, well, I would encourage them to play with those ideas a little bit off and on throughout their day. And gosh, if they, I don't know, can they make comments on this video so that we have maybe have some input or questions for the next one? That would be awesome.
I'll make sure when I post it to make the have that commentary with the video regarding anything they'd like to learn on and hear about, and then I'll make some follow-up post on the business page and my personal page to see what we can do to get some more areas of concern.
Okay, that would be great.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we've had Marieke Schuurs, the owner of Cantare Studios in Eugene, Oregon. We're going to be meeting with her again next week, and well, at least two more sessions regarding the new world of communication and those new dynamics we're having to learn to adjust and adapt to, and learning how to become the best possible effective communicator in this new season and this new time. Marika, thank you. Thank you for your amazing work. I noticed today that as my entire conversation with you, I wrote on my notes, she is so calm, very controlled. I love her demeanor.
Oh,
because that's what
Thank you.
I aspire to be. I know our personalities are different, but that it was evident to me that you were listening, that you were intentionally processing everything that I was saying, and you were completely engaged.
Well, thank you.
And so,
That's, that might be a good topic going forward because that probably is off-putting for most people across the computer. Easier to do in person.
yes,
Yeah.
very good. All right, well, you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll connect here on Zoom again next week.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
You have a good day.
You too.
Bye.